Hi, this is Sergeant Betsy Brantner Smith from the National Police Association, and this is the National Police Association podcast. I have a guest today that I knew you would all want to meet. He has a fascinating background during his law enforcement career, and then I think he's busier now in quote unquote retirement. He's like me; he's completely failed at retirement, and he's just everywhere talking about crime, talking about homicide, talking about cold cases. And I have about 150 questions for him because he is such a fascinating guy. Joe Giacalone, welcome to the show.
Hey, Betsy, thanks for having me.
So, Sarge, first of all, I have to ask everybody who comes on the show who was in law enforcement, why'd you become a cop?
Well, I mean, it's a short and long story all in itself. I wanted to be a part. I wanted to join the fire department. My godfather was a fireman, and he had, when I was a kid, he took me to see in the city all the trucks. So that was my gig, and I think my parents would have bet the house that I would have done that. But when the time came to take the test, the fire department wasn't hiring, so I decided to take the police test because at the time you could lateral over, and so you start with the police department, and maybe 2 years down the road you can join the fire department. Well, I ended up after about 3 years, I passed the sergeant's exam, and I was going to get promoted probably within 2 years or so. So I figured, you know what, I might as well just stick it out, and like the rest they say is kind of history.
So, Sergeant, best job in the agency, don't you think?
Absolutely. I mean, it's almost well, actually, maybe the lieutenant might be a little bit better, right? Because the lieutenant is like the elevator operator. Don't want to do it, push it down to the sergeant. Don't want to do it, push it up to the captain. So, yeah, I mean, listen, the sergeant, the first line supervisor, talk about getting your hands dirty and making decisions on the spot. So, if that's what you're into, that's definitely the way to be.
Yeah, I'm married to a lieutenant. I'm going to use that on him. So you ended up. I mean, you've done so many things, but you ultimately ended up running the cold case or a cold case homicide squad. Is that correct?
Right, yeah, the Bronx Cold Case Squad. So there was three supervisors, and if anybody doesn't know, New York City's got 5 counties. So we were three supervisors for 5 counties. So I ended up, covering parts of Brooklyn and sometimes Manhattan and Queens, and we didn't make much out of Staten Island, but yeah, just in case we had to go there too. But yeah, it was the best job that I ever had in the police department, and some of the greatest detectives in the world actually would work in those cases.
When does a case become quote unquote cold? What's the criteria?
Well, in New York City, it went by when there weren't any more viable leads. That could have happened in a month. It could have happened in 2 years, whatever it may be. But unfortunately, during the 80s and 90s, when the New York City had the crack epidemic and all the other stuff going on, I mean, I think it was 94, they had nearly 2,300 homicides. That's when the cases really started piling up, and the detectives didn't have time to work on them. And unfortunately, some cases slipped through the cracks. You would go into a record room and you'd see huge boxes, for one case, and you knew that was a special case. And those are the kind of things we kind of went towards.
Running a team like that, what was it like when you were able to solve a long standing cold case, especially when there were living relatives, living family members? Talk about what that's like.
Yeah, it's kind of really exciting, and it's tough to kind of even put an emotion on it, but it is something that really is adrenaline run. Like I said before, the detectives were absolutely unbelievable. I mean, these guys could find anything under a rock, and unfortunately, you couldn't make 100 of them and say, "Hey, let's go out and do all these cases." But you had some situations where these cases sat for so long, and these guys would just work miracles. And yes, DNA became a big focus on a lot of these cases, but even then, the skills to be able to get this case prosecuted in what we used to affectionately call the People's Republic of the Bronx was also an art form.
Absolutely. And when you're working cold cases, you don't want to just solve them and say, okay, we've got a bad guy. Then you prepare it for prosecution, which can be really daunting when a lot of time has passed, correct?
Absolutely. I said, so the way we had to do it was we would, even if we established probable cause, we still couldn't make the arrest. We'd have to then go to the district attorney's office and basically plead our case to the case that we've had. And a lot of times they would just say, well, it's not enough. Or, you know what, get me the Pope and three nuns as witnesses, and then maybe we can talk. Or, all right, you have his DNA, but you know what? You're going to need to bring him in now and make him confess, you know? So they always kind of put obstacles in front of you. If I was doing this today, one of the things that I would be trying to get up the ladder would be to try to create this cold case task force where you had the district attorneys working directly with you, because it often became a, okay, I don't have time for this, so I'm just going to give this guy 10 things to do, which is going to take him 6 months, you know? All right, goodbye, see you later. And unfortunately, that kind of way is not really conducive to these kind of cases.
I want to dig a little deeper into that because I think one of the things people don't really understand is the prosecutor's role in a detective's life. We on television, right? The cops go in there with their case and they hand it over, and the prosecutor just says, "Oh, great, let's go to court." You talked about it a little. Delve into the realities of dealing with the prosecutor's office when you're a detective.
Yeah, it's frustrating beyond belief. So the detective can work this case, spend every waking moment on it, and finally figure it out and be able to get the evidence to match up with it, and then bring it to the district attorney's office only to be told, no, it's not good enough. So one of the traits that you look for in choosing cold case investigators is that they basically people who refuse to give up, right? I would say my wife would be great at this because her only answers to her questions are yes or yes, right? There are no no's. You have to find people like that because you deal with this frustration every day, whether it's not being able to find a case, or then when you prepare your case and having the district attorney tell you flat out, and this is a true story, but I won't tell you which case, but flat out tell us that she didn't see a nexus on a case that we had 4 DNA hits and 7 sexual assaults. So, you know, that's the kind of thing that you deal with sometimes. And you just want to like reach across the table and just go crazy. But you have to remain calm, and sometimes you have to push buttons too in order to get your, sometimes get these cases done. So yes, it is extremely frustrating, and that's why I think a better model would be to working in tandem to try to get these things done. This way, you know exactly, as the investigator or the supervisor knows exactly what is expected to get done. Not that I'm going to do this and then 3 months later you're going to tell me, okay, you did that. Here's another 5 things to do, right? And that's unfortunately what happens.
Absolutely. So you have this storied career with the NYPD, and you retired. You were pretty young when you retired. How come you're not just sitting by a pool in Florida?
Yeah, like I like you're saying there, like I failed at retirement because I actually did. I was already teaching too. I was an adjunct at John Jay College. Actually, I'm still teaching there. It's been over 20 years now, and I'm not one to sit and let like guess dust grow under my feet, but this actually gives me the opportunity to do some things that maybe I just want to do, right? So whether it was writing books or teaching classes or starting a podcast, those are all the kind of things that Joe wanted to do, so to speak. So, and that's the kind of thing that I did. And you know what, like everything else, you get lucky sometimes, right? You're at the right place at the right time, or you speak to the right person. And I had a lot of help along the way. And that's always the thing. And that's one of the things that I always try to do is I try to help out, retiring law enforcement officers who want to get into the media field, who want to do these things. And I just kind of feed them some of the things that I no longer want to do, because as I'm getting older now, it becomes a job, right? And then when it becomes a job, it's not fun anymore. So you have to, consider that aspect of it all too.
So let's talk about the podcast. Because again, right now, everyone, including my youngest adult child, is obsessed with true crime. She didn't give a damn when I was a cop for 29 years, but now that's all she wants to listen to is true crime podcast. Why are people so fascinated with that stuff, do you think?
I think it's always been that way, right? I mean, if you saw like over the last couple of decades with TV shows like CSI Miami and all those other things that came up, I just think that it's part of the human experience to try to figure out or understand why people do terrible things to other people, because most of us can't understand why somebody would do that. So getting into the psychology part of it, the investigative things about how detectives go about doing their jobs, I think is extremely interesting. And it's also the fact that there's a sense of justice to it. A lot of people like to see the good guys win, right? I know over the last few years we've been painted not as such good guys, but when the day's over, we're still the good guys. And I think that's also part of it.
So how did you decide to start doing this, to start podcasting, to start talking to people about some really difficult cases?
Well, be honest with you. So when I actually wanted to start this like 10 years ago instead of only a couple of years ago, but I was discouraged to do so. Like, say, hey, listen, nobody's going to want to listen. Nobody's going to want to do this. And, what do you know? There's people out there with more experience, and all that stuff is true, right? There are people out there with more experience and more cases and more, dealt more homicides and more crime scenes. Of course, there's always that aspect of it. But I came from a different position in respect that not only had I done the practical side of it, but I've written textbooks on it. And then I seem to fall into the media thing pretty well. So I had that exposure out there where people kind of, saw me on TV, and then they say, oh, okay, I saw this guy on CNN or Fox News or what have you. And then, oh, he's got a podcast too. So I think that has helped. So I started True Crime with the Sarge a couple of years ago. And now I've expanded it to not only the YouTube live shows, but I've also now have a strict audio podcast where I do never heard before interviews with people, and I make them strictly an audio podcast because people, say, hey, I listen to your YouTube shows, while I'm driving in the car, but it'd be great, even more so, just a strict audio podcast. So I went that route, right? You listen to what the people tell you that they want to hear or see, and you get lucky that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems like in the last 2 or 3 years, we see, even though crime is going down, but we see some really horrific violent crime all around the country, whether it's in big city areas and in rural areas and things like that. And you're not afraid to talk about any of that.
No, I'm not. And I don't pull any punches either. So what do I mean by that? Well, if the cops do a great job, I say, hey, the cops did a great job. If the cops did a bad job, I say the cops did a bad job. All right. And we can start picking out cases like that in recent memory where you say to yourself, well, I mean, leadership screwed up on this big time. Or you know what, this should have been done. Why wasn't that done? And then all kinds of falls on supervisors at the time because hey, this is your case. What were you thinking, kind of thing. So it's important to be on both sides of the aisle, right? Not just pro one side or anti one other side, because people don't want to hear that. And actually, I get a lot of things where people say it's actually a breath of fresh air when you actually say, "Hey, listen, this could have been done better." And listen, as you know, Betsy, in this arena, you always piss off somebody. Meaning, if you say the cops did good, the people who hate the cops come after you. If you say the cops did bad, the people who hate the cops say great job, and the cops are saying, "What are you doing?" So you can't win. And I just threw that out there and saying, no matter what I say, I'm always going to upset one group, but that doesn't matter because it needs to get out. It needs to be able to be put out there, especially when it comes to officer involved shootings. I think I couldn't tell you how many years trying to explain people just the basics and things like, Graham versus Connor or Tennessee versus Garner. And, the whole thing about the medical examiner, when every time there's a police involved shooting and they would ramp up oh my God, the medical examiner said it's a homicide. And I'm like, yeah, no kidding. There's no other classification it could be. So that was like, all right, Joe, throw it out there. So every time there would be a shooting, and I would just write a tweet out or a Facebook post and say, just to avoid all the confusion, tomorrow morning, the medical examiner is going to say this is a homicide. That's it. And sometimes it works, because people just like, well, how did you know? It's not natural. It's not accident. It's not suicide. There's only one left.
You're absolutely right. People misunderstand the language that we use, the language in the legal system. Again, and I guess you've got to chuck that up to, again, the TV shows that they watch and things like that. And again, especially in the last 5 years, but even in the last 10, 15 years, this ramped up hatred of the American law enforcement officer by certain factions in society. They too like to jump on words like homicide and things like that when you're talking about an officer involved shooting. And that's one of the things I'm going to veer off just a little bit and then I'll come back. But you were a member of one of probably the most famous police department in the nation, if not in the world. And the NYPD has really taken it on the chin in the last 10 to 15 years, just from a public relations standpoint, and now from a, just a shortage of personnel standpoint. Now that you're on the outside looking in, What do you see as the future for the NYPD?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have much optimistic about what's going on, and the reason is, and it's just in this part here is not just NYPD, but it's all police departments that are urban environments, right? We see the counties doing pretty good, but the urban cities, New York, Chicago's, and Miami's, and they have a problem with recruitment and retention. And as this goes further and further on, we're going to see less good things. Let's put it that way, right? Because we don't want to say, be so negative. But the issue that comes down to is as police departments like the NYPD are shrinking in size, there's no way that you can handle the amount of jobs that they do on a daily basis. I mean, you're looking about a city about 9 million people, and it's pretty big when you think about it. It's not just, people think like New York City is just Manhattan, right? They forget about all the outer boroughs, and it is huge. And the issue that comes down to is response times go up. You have political situations that are just like you kind of just scratch your head. Things like diaphragm laws and removing qualified immunity, and all these things go against the police department, right? Where you handcuff them literally from doing their job, and it makes it 10 times difficult. So when greener pastures arrive on their doorstep, hey, come to Florida, hey, come to here, they're out the door. And I don't blame them. I mean, I used to tell my students, hey, listen, the NYPD is a great job, this and that. I have a very difficult time selling that anymore, and it's unfortunate because as I see what's going on with this department, especially in I would say the last 8 years have been really, really bad, and difficult. And listen, you start dropping your qualifications to become a police officer, you become a self-fulfilling prophecy, where the people who hate the cops that wanted to defund the police, and then cops defunded themselves, which was something I predicted. And then they hire people that should have never been hired in the first place. We elect people who should never been elected in the first place. And when things go bad, they turn around and say, "See, look how bad the cops are." And it's like, to me, it's frustrating because they don't understand that this was by design, some of these things, and not by like luck or bad luck. It was designed to do this way, and it's working out perfectly in their favor.
What do you tell your students who come? Because I know some young people come to a class, a criminal justice class or a death investigation class or whatever, just because they're interested. But a lot come with a real genuine interest in getting an education and then serving in law enforcement. Um, what do you tell them? Where do you tell them to go? What do you tell them to look at these days?
Well, I always start off positive. I was like, if your dream was ever to be a law enforcement officer, whether it's a local county cop, city cop, whatever it may be, this is probably the greatest opportunity that you will have in the next 20 years because police departments are hurting so much for people. They're actually offering some major incentives, and we're starting to see salaries even going up, even in places like New York City. Because why? They have to realize that if they don't do something soon, it's going to become catastrophic. So if you have that idea in your head, or there's a push or a drive that says this is what you want to do, you are in a great spot. And the thing is, like I tell my students kiddingly, I said, well, listen, when you go to the prom, or when you're in high school, or whatever, you were going to pick a girl or a guy to go to the prom, you pick the best looking one there, right? So sometimes you have to take a hard look at some of these police departments because some of them are side chicks, so to speak, where you're going to go for another county job first or the state police first. And then, you know what? If none of this works, well, I could always date the NYPD or, another major city. That's basically the way you have to look at it. You're in the kind of driver's seat so far. And I always tell, like, even I believe it was the New York State Police were offering if females, they were offering them like 5 points on the test, for a civil service exam. I'm like, ladies, if this is what you want to do, you know what, 5 points in a civil service exam, you're talking jumping thousands of names. So, you know, go for those things. If they're offering it, you got to take it. And that's just part of it. And a lot of times these kids, they want to do things, but they don't know where to look. So when I hear about a good job or something like that, I'll post it on our, bright space page or something like that. Say, hey, listen, New Jersey State Police is hiring. I know some don't want to leave mom and dad because they don't want to leave New York. That's fine, but New York State's hiring. Nassau or Suffolk County, if they give a job again, those are the kind of things you go for first, and you take it from there, so to speak.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because I know when I got on the job and when you got on the job, we'd apply and there'd be, literally thousands of candidates, for a couple of jobs. And now that's really flip-flopped. And I agree, and I tell young people the same thing: is be picky about where you even bother to apply, and think about not just opportunities for advancement, but think about where you'd want to raise a family. Think about the weather. I patrolled in the Chicago metro area in 60 below wind chill. Now, if I had that to do over, I might have started my career in Florida or Arizona, someplace where the temperatures weren't quite like that. And so, yeah, it's a good idea to tell these kids to kind of be picky, right? And think about where you want to be on the long term. Um, I want to switch gears again because, as you know, I live in Pima County, Arizona, so I'm in Nancy Guthrie land, and she's been missing for several months now. And I talk to so many people who think that she's one of maybe 5 people missing in the whole country, which is extraordinary to me. I want you to talk about the national missing and what is it? National Missing and Unidentified Persons System Database.
Amos.
Explain to
Yeah, the name.
people.
Yeah, Namus.
Yes,
Yeah,
explain to
the national
people what
missing.
that
Yeah.
is and why we need something like that and how law enforcement accesses it.
Right. So NamUs is the National Missing Unidentified Person System. Is designed to collect all the data on people who are missing or you find unidentified human remains and they get cataloged in it. It's the only system of its kind that allows not only the police but the medical examiners and coroners, but also the public to access and input data. And it's a wonderful program and it's underutilized. There's only I think it's 16 states that are mandated to use it, which to me is absolutely mind-boggling because you have like New York is mandated to use it. So you have so many cases of unidentified human remains that you find every year in the state of New York, and it's a great place to put it in because the idea behind it is if I put human remains in this system in from New York and somebody from California, their family submits the DNA into the system because their family member's missing. The idea is to be able to marry these two together because a lot of times you have people that are unclaimed and somebody's looking for them in another state, but the systems aren't talking to one another. So it's important that every state does this. I think Ohio is trying to become the 17th state now to do it through legislation, which to me is mind-boggling that we need to be legislated to do this. And to me, it's kind of a part of the job, but there's other problems with it in the respect of, like, for instance, when I was doing cold cases, this was relatively new at the time. But now I see a huge problem where, as you know, people retire, people quit, people get fired, people pass away, all these things happen. Are they going back into the database and updating the contact information for all their cases that they had? Are they giving the new detectives information? Or are they, what are they doing about that? Because if they get a hit, they don't know who to call. And as well, they call it, we call it the telephone switchboard operator. That's how old I am. Uh, you would get, who, what, where? I don't know what case, what precinct. We got 76 of them. I mean, and that's therein lies your problem. So it's just not inputting stuff into it. It's about maintaining it. It's about updating it. But it's a great system, and they passed legislation a couple of years ago to integrate it with NCIC. So you have basically a double whammy here, right? Because NCIC has all the law enforcement databases and searches and missing persons and all the other warrants and you name it. And they were going to marry these two, but it's kind of been slow because I guess they're reluctant to bring this outside program that was developed outside of the venue of the FBI and then integrate it. I guess I can understand that maybe there's possible security issues, but if they can't figure that out, well, at least get everybody on board to use this.
And I'm glad you brought this up because, again, thanks to television and movies, people think that there's just one big law enforcement database for all the information that we need, as investigators, as law enforcement officers, and it all pops up in our computer sitting in front of us or in the car. And nothing could be further from the truth, right?
Absolutely, yes. There's no magic button that you push and things pop up in the midair. That doesn't happen, and you don't solve a 40-year-old case with in 45 minutes with 3 commercials. That doesn't happen either. But the idea is, and I throw numbers out there sometimes. I said if every state, every police department, nearly 18,000 agencies went online and inputted their missing persons data into NamUs, I guarantee you they could probably close 10 or 15% of cases overnight. Just because, some small police department in, let's just say, Arizona They found somebody in the desert. They input it in there, and then all of a sudden, Wisconsin gets the hit. So I mean, it's just it could be as simple as that. And unfortunately, families are waiting for answers, and these agencies aren't talking to one another yet. I mean, listen, in 2026, we should be way beyond ORI numbers. I mean, at this point, you're like, come on, guys.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Um, I want to talk about one of the other things that you do is that I find really fascinating. Um, you and explain it to me. You get involved in these sort of true crime uh, events, things like that. Again, these are wildly popular because people love this stuff, and because there's so many people out there, as we found with the Guthrie case, there's a lot of civilians who really have opinions about how law enforcement works, how to work cases, how to find clues, things like that. Talk about that.
Yeah, so I've been invited 4 times to speak at the Crime Con festivals or conferences, however you want to refer to them. So I've been to New Orleans, Chicago, Orlando, and Nashville. Those are a lot of fun, but they're huge, right? I mean, if somebody has any interest in this, and if you've never been to one of these things, you have to go to experience it because it's absolutely wild. And you get up on stage. So for a couple of years ago, and I believe it was in Orlando. I was working with the Law and Crime Network, and we put on a Long Island serial killer show right after Rex Sherman, the alleged killer, was arrested, and we did this whole big thing on that because growing up on Long Island, this case was in my backyard. I followed it from the minute and was really on top of things. And it's a lot of fun. You get a chance to meet people out there. Plus, having written 2 textbooks, that's another draw for them too. So because they do book signings and all the other stuff. And now I also part of this thing called the Hamptons Who Done It, which is out in East Hampton, Long Island, which is if you people that don't know, it's a very nice part of Long Island.
Oh yes.
And yeah, then we're coming up to the 4th annual one in a couple of weeks, and that one too. It's a much smaller venue, and people get a chance to sit and talk with you and ask you questions. We do this coffee and crime thing for like an hour, where we stay at one of the local coffee shops, and I bring in other friends and guests that are there, and people sit and they can just pick your brain and just get a chance to talk over a cup of coffee. It's actually a lot of fun. It's unique in so many different ways.
I love it. Well, Sarge, you are, you're a legend. And now in retirement, you're doing so many cool things that I really want people to pay attention to and to appreciate. So tell everybody where they can find you, your website, where they can find the books, all of that.
Sure. So my website is josephgiacalone.com. My podcast on YouTube is True Crime with the Sarge, and the audio podcast, if you want to find it, it's on Spotify and iHeart and Apple, of course. That's True Crime with the Sarge, the audio files. That's the only way I can come up with the difference of the two. And as I said, I've written 2 books. Both have been published by Blue 360 Media. The Cold Case Handbook in its 2nd edition, and the Criminal Investigative Function, a guide for new investigators, which is the 4th edition, which I've been threatening to send Sheriff Nanos a copy, but I haven't had the gall to do that yet. Anyway, I just had to throw that in there.
I'll put down my credit card for it. I'll hand
But
deliver it.
yeah, I mean, I've been busy. So, like I said, I'll be at a couple. I'm doing a fundraising in Horsham, Pennsylvania, for students who want to take forensics classes over the summer, like a camp kind of thing. So there's going to be a bunch of us coming together. We don't of course, get paid for it. We go there on our own time. We sit there, we talk to the kids, and hopefully people will donate money so that these kids can go to the camp during the summertime. And all they do is forensics. They learn how to do fingerprints and all. It's actually kind of cool. So I'm fortunate that I have the opportunity to do stuff like that. And sometimes I just shake my head and say, how did I end up here? Right? How did I even end up in this spot to be able to do this? But it's actually a good feeling sometimes where you can actually help these kids that really want to do it.
Well, Sarge, you are a wealth of information and you're a really great role model for young people. I hope you keep at it for a long time to come. And I can't thank you enough for spending time with us today. And if you'd like more information about the National Police Association, you can visit us at nationalpolice.org.
Every day, The brave men and women of law enforcement put their lives on the line to keep us safe. But they need our help to continue their mission. Activist politicians, progressive prosecutors, the ACLU, and the rest of the anti-police forces receive millions in donations from extremist pro-criminal elements like George Soros and woke corporations. The National Police Association is fighting them in courts around the country, including the United States Supreme Court, defending officers who are being attacked for doing their jobs. Additionally, the National Police Association works year-round to pass tough-on-crime legislation to put and keep criminals behind bars. Consider going to nationalpolice.org and donating to keep us in the fight. Together we can win. That is nationalpolice.org.